Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Artificial Intelligence in Project Management. My name is Keith Turner, and together with my colleague alarmingly, we'll be facilitating this event. Before we get started, I would like to cover a few items so you know how to participate today. Please note that this event is being recorded. If you do not wish to attend a recorded event, please disconnect now. Note that your line will remain muted throughout the event. You will have the opportunity to submit written questions to today's panelists by typing them into the questions pane of your control panel. There will also be a short poll towards the end of our panelist presentation, where your response will be greatly appreciated. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them towards the end of today's event. I would now like to introduce today's panelist, Lloyd Skinner. Lloyd is CEO and founder of Greyfly Limited. He has over 25 years of project experience working in multiple sectors in both project support and delivery roles. He has managed major transformation programs underpinned by infrastructure refresh. For the last 2+ years, he has led Greyfly, who are preferred suppliers to the BBC for program management and have been developing services regarding AI and project management to tackle the real project delivery problem. Lloyd, a warm welcome and over to you.
Thank you, Keith. And good evening to everybody. Hopefully this is coming across nice and clear for you. Thank you to Keith and Ilana, who've been helping me very ably with the preparation for the talk. As Keith said, I'm going to just give you a fleeting view of what AI in project management is all about. We've got 20 minutes. We're going to do the talk in 20 minutes, so it's going to be quite high level. What I'm intending to cover is, first of all, as Keith mentioned there, the real project problem. So we're going to talk about what that means. Then we're going to talk about how AI project tools are developing and a classification of those tools. Then I'm going to talk about a couple of use cases around AI, how you could apply AI to project management. Then I'm going to talk about the journey that you would go on to apply AI to project management. And then the last slide will be about the benefits. You know, why are people so excited about this? Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. Just very quickly then, Keith gave me a fantastic intro. I've worked on large projects. There's a couple of examples there on the right-hand side. I was the overall program manager for both of them. They're both BBC projects. One's the Drama Village, the top picture there. That's where they make Casualty, Doctor Who, Poppycom. I was responsible for the property, the technology, the operating model, the PMO, the business change, etc. And the one below that is the new headquarters for the BBC in Cardiff. So for those that are watching really carefully, you can see that the grey hairs are for all to see there. I've been responsible for full life cycle transformation. Okay, so what we did was a couple of years ago when we launched Greyfly, rather than jumping straight into a set of technical challenges, we looked at what happens in projects, what really happens, and we coined this phrase, the real project problem. And unfortunately, projects fail. But when I say fail, I mean they don't deliver to time, they don't deliver to budget, or they don't release the benefits that you plan at the beginning. And it's not me that's saying this, it's, you know, the APM, professional body, Association of Project Management. And you can see there that they quoted 30% of projects fail, rising to 70% if there's a technology element. And as you know, most projects have a technology element. And when we researched this, I guess the thing that surprised me, you know, as you can see, I've got a reasonable experience in project delivery, was that it didn't matter which industry sector that you were talking about. It didn't matter what type of project you were talking about. Was it IT? Was it business change? Was it property. It didn't matter what method they were following. Was it agile? Was it waterfall? Or was it somewhere in between? It didn't matter the size of the project. You know, was it £100,000 project or was it £100 million project? The reasons for project failure were the same, and that's why we designed that little model there. And again, for anybody who's around the project, around projects, there's not rocket science there. I'm pretty sure that most people would have called out those reasons for failure. We've actually developed those 7 into 32 capabilities and then down into 130 different elements. And I'll come back to that as we walk through. Now, hold on a second, stop the front page a moment. Roughly 1 to 2 months ago, the APM has just republished their latest research on project failure, and it's actually gone up to 80%. So here we are, we're in a context, guys, where people are crying out for first time regular, consistent project delivery. The statistics tell us that projects don't deliver to plan time or release the benefits. So perhaps there needs to be a new way. And I think what we're seeing now in the press, and certainly, you know, my feed and other people's feed are that this whole subject of AI in project management or data-led project delivery is really coming to the fore. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it. I think before diving into how you could apply AI to project management, I thought, and I'm sure some of you know this already, but for those that don't, there's a little definition there of what AI is. And again, it's not my definition, it's you know, a credible source. And for me, the key words there are learning, reasoning, and self-correction. Now, you know, there's a whole thread about ethics and ethics of AI. I'm not going to cover that today, but for me, it's really interesting because, you know, basically that is looking at, and I like this phrase, augmenting what the human does, so improving what the human does. Now, in wider industry, AI is becoming pervasive. I think this is last year's quote, so it'll be even more now. But, you know, in all walks of corporate industry, AI is starting to appear. So, you know, my personal view is project management is slightly behind the curve from other areas, you know, where perhaps they have larger volumes of data, so billing and customer care systems, finance systems, etc. So, you know, it's about time AI in project management caught up. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about in a little bit more. So first of all, in terms of classifying the products that are on the marketplace, in front of you, you can see that there's a 2x2 grid. And the idea is that across the top there, horizontally, you get less human within the process. And then down the side there, vertically, you can see the cleverness, is that the right word, of the computer systems being used. So as you can imagine, the ultimate goal is to get to the bottom right-hand corner. But first of all, streamlining. And streamlining is when you're starting to see different systems hand off between each other. So, for example, when we researched, at the moment, we found over 300 project tools on the marketplace, and you know, it's growing rapidly. No longer is the day where, you know, we all used MS Project and it was the sort of one of the 2 or 3 planning tools on the marketplace. There are literally tens, if not hundreds, of planning tools themselves, and these planning tools themselves are getting increasingly clever, and you know, they're starting to link between planning and, I don't know, calendar management or planning and timesheet reporting. And that's where we're seeing that cluster and that first wave of AI tools appear. In terms of automation, the key there, again, I think it goes back to this augment. And I think the underpinning point here is that you are attempting to allow the human to do more value-added tasks by taking the administration layer away. And, you know, I think we can debate where that administration layer is in project delivery. You know, some obvious ones might be, you know, those tiresome reports that you have to do in multiple different formats to different people, or perhaps, you know, there are other areas that you could automate, such as, you know, approval of documents, for example. So there's a lot more going on, and for those who know about that area, there's the whole RPA area, so robotic process automation, as it were. The bit that I think is getting more exciting at the moment is the whole insight and foresight area. So this is about predicting project outcomes, understanding how your legacy projects performed in order to understand how projects are likely to make their plans, make their budgets, make their baselines. And this type of area tends to be based on expert systems, which are decision tree systems, and they've been around for a long time, since the 70s. I guess now, though, we have the compute power, we have the compute tools as well to make these systems cleverer. And now, you know, for those that are across this, we now are starting to see machine learning products appear, where they're learning, the machine is learning based on the data points within the project. And you think about how many different data points are within a project, you know, whether you're talking about the plan by stage, plan by work breakdown structure, plan by milestone, baseline forecast. So all of these different data points, yes, a human can digest them and make sense out of them, but that tends to take a long time. If you've got a system that can be used and predicts outcomes, then perhaps that's going to be a real drive. And we're really seeing products starting to appear in there. The self-directed, think of that, and some people have coined the phrase the robo-PM, the robotic project manager. I mean, you know, it might sound crazy, but, you know, let's not forget here that you know, we've had autopilots on aeroplanes for some time. You know, we're about to have self-driving cars, certainly in public arenas, quite rapidly. Some countries do. So, you know, perhaps it's not that far away, and perhaps what you need to think about there are simpler, smaller projects where there are more basic decisions going on, being the first areas where you'll see that the human may be taken out of the loop completely. So that was a whistle-stop tour. I hope, you know, what you're hearing there is a lot of movement going on in the marketplace. There are even more products coming to the market. Those big players are making their products even cleverer, even more intuitive. They're starting to look at how they can apply AI to them as well. So lots of stuff happening there. So, and it's nevertheless relatively early days. So I said I was going to talk to you a little bit about some use cases. This is one about prediction. This happens to be something that we're working on at Greyfly. And the key here is that there's a relatively simple process with relatively simple technology can give you some fairly rapid insights. The challenge are those first two steps. And that goes for those companies, even that are managing large portfolios of projects. It's all about the data, guys, you know, and as bless my father, he rest his soul, as it were. I remember him saying to me, Lloyd, you know, all this computing stuff, it's all about garbage in, garbage out. And at the time, being a young 21-year-old man straight out of university, I was like, no, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. Of course, he knew of what he was talking about. And the efforts we're finding is very much the data preparation stage is the key. And, you know, for those people that have been around these type of projects, you know, people quote 80 to 90% is in the data preparation. Actually, as well as the data, I think you need to think the step before that, which is what are the processes that are creating the data? You know, and there's a term about trusted data, making sure that the data is fit for purpose, as it were. So there's a lot of challenge around that, but once you're over that hurdle of getting data, and again there's some debate about how much data, and that depends on what depth you're getting to, but we're certainly working towards getting insight and meaning out of relatively few records. You then obviously have to get that data in a certain format and certain shape to bring it into a system. Now, what we've been doing at Greyfly is defining a data model of what are the key data points to look at to be able to provide insights. And you can see there that we've hopefully taken the path of least resistance, that we're assuming that companies have some data around items such as plans, such as finance, such as resourcing. And once that data's into the system, obviously you can run some analytics, you can run some insight on it, but also the more data you get in there, it's back to that machine learning. And of course, this is an iterative process. So once you set up the process once, you can start working towards those times that as the world moves on, you can provide increasingly towards real-time interpretation. So most companies run on a monthly project reporting life cycle. So, you know, perhaps the initial step is to run through this process on a monthly cycle, but eventually you can get this to be real time. Now, of course, some of that all back to where is the data coming from. Now, also, those most eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that I talked about those 3 foundations for project success. I didn't talk about some of those other foundations for success, which are the harder elements. So for example, items around governance or business change or business requirements. So if you think about it, for example, business change, what are the key data points around business change? I don't know. Does the project have a business change manager or not? Yes or no? Does that have a relationship on whether the project's going to be successful or whether the project's going to fail? So perhaps once you've been through this phased approach, looking at those quantitative data around plan, time and cost, you can start looking, broadening your horizons of the data points you're trying to examine. And all this time you're learning, your systems are learning what creates success and what creates failure in projects. You know, so for example, in that first wave, maybe you're looking at start to finish dates, baseline versus forecast. Maybe you're looking at projects using a certain technology, or projects run out of a certain geographical region, or perhaps even projects that are sponsored by a certain division or a certain individual, so that you can start getting a tapestry of which of your projects are most likely to succeed or fail. So prediction for me is probably the most exciting part of this. I'm going to throw it out to the audience at the end to see whether prediction is more exciting, or perhaps some of you will think that automation is more exciting. And there's that quote again about augmenting and why this piece of development will increasingly come to the fore in the project domain, because the benefit will is there to drive this. Now, of course, in the early days, benefits tend to be the domain of an organisation that has a large forum of projects and project stakeholders. So, you know, if, for example, you've got 1 or 2 or 5 project managers, you're not going to spend a lot of money on automating a certain process. If you've got 100 project managers or 1,000 project managers, and you can save time and effort from those project managers, perhaps then there's a return on investment and you don't need as many project managers. So again, I think this area will be driven by benefits, along with being driven by the sophistication of some of those tools that I talked about earlier. So you can see some examples there. It's getting clever, guys. It's getting clever. You know, my personal one, and again, you know, it depends where you sit on the old Big Brother ethics debate, are chatbots that are reading your messages and populating your risk logs. You know, so gone are the days perhaps where you can lift the carpet up and brush that risk away from your seniors. So again, you know, obviously lots of sophistication there and lots of communication management required. But hopefully that's given you an idea that automation is coming. Okay, so why are we doing this? Now, I think, you know, for me, this is the what is driving the development here. So you know, the potential of cost savings is, you know, obviously is probably the underlying reason here, you know, why most companies do anything, or certainly most corporations do anything in the world we find ourselves. It's the promise of return on investment. It's the promise of savings. It's the ability to do more with less, if you like. And how do you start to think about unlocking those savings? Well, you know, if you can get insight as to which projects are more likely to succeed or fail, it means that you can then start focusing your efforts. And, you know, that might be focusing your efforts on, you know, which projects do you put your best resources on, you know, which projects do you apply your most amount of assurance rigor to, you know, to give those project owners the most likelihood of success. Perhaps actually those insights can get even further up the project pipeline, and it stops you doing projects in the first place. You know, if you understand that, you know, when somebody comes with a business case that says the project's going to last X and cost Y, and you look at the key attributes, the key data points around that project, and you realize that their X is X times 2 and their Y is times 3, then perhaps you would stop that project in the first place. Now, I mentioned earlier about data and the importance of data. Now, actually, to my mind, data is just one part of this journey to AI and project management. I think, you know, let's go old school a second, guys, and think about people, process, and systems. You think about this from a people point of view, you know, so I think on the one hand, you're talking about a change management piece here. Can you imagine rocking up to a corporate board and saying, did you know, Mr. Chief Exec, that your projects over the last 5 years have delivered over budget, twice the amount. And did you know that we're forecasting those new projects in your pipeline, you won't have enough money to deliver? So, you know, that type of stuff is all about resistance to change. And there's a change element of this AI in project management piece. The process piece, I mentioned earlier, you've got to get your processes right so that they turn out the right data in the first place. You know, so that I don't know, even back to basics about, you know, are all the projects following a certain method? What do the milestones mean? Has it gone through the baselining process that is agreed? So you end up with this whole area that, you know, you're not just talking about a systems journey here, you're talking about a process and a people journey. And that's that point that, you know, you're trying to change the mindsets of people. You know, certainly in some domains, you know, for example, PMOs, traditionally are domains of administration, but actually what you're trying to do is change their minds into a more analytics mindset. And from that perspective, this is a change program in its own right. We're almost there, guys, in the fullness of time. So we talked about AI in project management, and really the key here is about aligning AI and your AI in project management journey to your goals of a corporation to increase your project maturity. You know, if you're at lower levels of project maturity, that means that your projects are more haphazard, are less likely to be consistently delivered, will be hitting that real project problem on a consistent manner. So actually, AI can take you on that journey to increase your maturity. And you can see here that actually it's a bit of a transformation journey. You know, the first step is you need to understand what exists in terms of people, process, systems. You need to understand what maturity, you need to understand what you're dealing with to go on this journey. Now, the beauty here is that actually you can start looking to implement some of that prediction stuff quite quickly. I think even on the automation side, you could implement quite quickly. Obviously, you need to work out where the biggest gains are, the biggest benefits are, as it were. So you've got this iterative process. So there's a very simple set of journey there. Obviously, with a particular client, it gets increasingly confident. So to wrap it up, guys, I've almost delivered to time, I can see, not quite. But my conclusion here is that AI is increasingly becoming the power of the new way of project management. It is coming, people. There are real benefits coming here. I think this other point about don't run before you walk, you can walk, you know, that step about getting your data ready, getting your data prepared, getting your processes more mature, getting the right systems in place takes time. So you've got to have your eye on the longer term goal, but you need to build your foundations. So don't run before you can walk. As I said, this is transformation. This is a journey that you're taking that client on. So therefore, you know, it's a step process. You need to break those business change barriers down. Ultimately, you need to work on that data as well and the things around that data. So eventually, guys, you know, maybe I would say this, but I think you'll get increasingly into that self-directed boxes where, you know, the augmentation of the human will increase over time. So it's slightly off-putting speaking to the computer, but that just about wraps me up. Now, what I've asked the people to do, Alana is going to bring up on screen in 1 second the poll, but I had a nice easy poll here. guys. So, you know, I've talked about the main thrusts of AI in project management being prediction and automation. I'm basically asking where you think the benefit would be, or perhaps I haven't convinced you that there is a benefit coming here. So either way, feel free to answer in a second, but also think about your questions and we can look to try and answer some of those questions. So there you go. That's me wrapped up. Keith, Alana?
Lloyd, thank you very much for a very informative presentation. As you just said, everybody on the line should now be able to see the poll question. So what areas do you feel that AI will be most beneficial? Prediction, automation, and immaterial benefits. And if it's an immaterial benefit, maybe you could raise a question explaining why you think it is not material to project management. We'll just allow a few moments for everybody to respond, and then we'll share the results with you.
What sort of percentage are we at, Alana, in terms of respondees?
Well, we've got 80% so far, Lloyd voted, so still give a few more moments.
I'm actually really intrigued as to the answer to this, guys. I'm going to have to put my debating hat on if there's too many who are voting the immaterial benefit.
Right, I'll close the poll in a few seconds. So anyone else left, vote now, forever hold your peace.
So I can't see the results. If you could read them out, Alana, that would be great.
We should have them on screen now for everyone. Prediction was the quite clear winner.
Oh, really? What was the percentage?
59%.
And automation? Sorry, I just can't see it at all.
We've got 59% prediction, 34% automation, and 6% immaterial benefit.
Okay, excellent. So over to you guys. I think you're going to curate some questions now.
Yeah, so thanks again, and I'm sure, as I say, we'll reflect on those in the Q&A process. So I'll now hand over to Alana, who will lead us through the Q&A session.
Hi there. Yes, we'll try and get a few questions in now. So starting off with a question from Keith. I know this is a fly in the face of AI, but to you, how important is the attitude of the team to deliver success? Teams are a common factor when methodologies and technologies have changed.
It goes back to what I said. From my point of view, the barriers to entry to this AI and project management journey, I think the simplest way to think about those are people, process, and system. You know, for those who've been around IT projects, sometimes the system starts and the people follow. Certainly, if there's change management specialists on the line, they'll be curling their toes to that point. But you know, occasionally tails do wag dogs. But my personal view is you need to march forward together and have a change management plan as much as you have to have a data preparation or a process preparation plan as well. So yeah, no, I believe it's transformation we're talking about here.
Okay, great. So another question from Aaron. AI will help us make project decisions based on the data points as you suggested, but will we risk being over-reliant on those systems? By changing the mindset of staff and investing in implementing these systems, what if, say, one of those systems didn't deliver? Who would be accountable, the system itself as a whole or the company delivering the system?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and especially pertinent at these moments of time when the maturity of the systems are very early. And you know, what was the phrase? Lies and statistics. You know, I think those type of negative connotations are absolutely allowable and absolutely true. And no doubt there will be some cases when these occur. I think the reality is, as systems become increasingly intelligent, that hopefully those number of cases will be reduced. Again, it touches on that ethics debate that I mentioned earlier. So I think it's inevitable the tide of these systems will increase. In terms of accountability, well, you know, I think that depends on how off the wall you want to be. I mean, ultimately, you know, in the world we live in today, I think the majority of people believe that the human, the system will be the slave to the human. Now, you know, for those sci-fi people amongst you, perhaps they don't believe that completely, and the tables will be turned. So, you know, I think it's such a broad question. There'll be different layers to that. And, you know, hopefully there's enough checks and balances in the system that nothing too scary happens. Again, you know, go back to those early examples of, you know, autopilots and autopilots taking over the aeroplane and doing what have you. Ultimately, the human jumps in at the moment. So, you know, I don't know. My personal view is it depends on what timeline we're talking about here, but certainly in the short term, you know, it will come back on somebody's toes, and depending on how big a challenge it is, it will depend on how high up it goes in the organisation. But it's a great question.
Great. We have another comment from Preeti. I have used tools with some degree of integration with real-time reporting, but they're not very sophisticated. So did you want to say anything maybe about your experience with where that is currently and where the market is for real-time reporting from AI?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said a second ago. In terms of maturity of these systems, we're at the foothills here. You know, these are early days. I mean, when I started talking about AI in project management 2 years ago, maybe even slightly more than 2 years ago, people just looked at me strangely, and, you know, I couldn't even get a conversation with people. Now, as we know, you know, every professional body is talking about AI in project management. There's a gold rush by systems developers, systems providers to create ever improved systems. But you're absolutely right, it's still early days. I think, you know, year on year, you know, maybe quarter on quarter, they'll be improving. And, you know, in any competitive marketplace, hopefully the best ones will come to the fore. I think one of the challenges you've got here is there are so many tools, you know, and that's not just in project land. Obviously, you know, the communication tools that we're getting used to is quite painful. So you know, I think it's early days. I think more and more will come, and you know, just watch this space. It's just going to get better and better. So.
Okay, great. Combined with a comment and a further question. So we had a comment from Andrew. I selected automation as an earlier target for implementation. Prediction requires much more training data, and companies are probably a bit short on that. With a comment and a question from Chris. You talk about data from projects and data points. Do you have a defined set of data points you suggest we capture, and how big does the data set need to be reliable?
Yeah, I mean, both very salient questions there. The thing is, it goes back to the AI and project management journey. There's a couple of things there. There's the don't run before you can walk point. And also, you know, that means perhaps following somebody like Gartner's analytic continuum, where, you know, using tools which have some AI built into them. So, for example, Microsoft BI, you can apply some quite clever analytics to the data and some very basic data points, and even providing that information can provide insights so that people can more rapidly look at projects that are most likely to succeed or fail. And those number of data points are relatively small, and of course the number of records don't necessarily need to run into the hundreds, if not thousands. The more records you've got, the more data points you've got of trusted data, the quicker you are going to accelerate your development. We are personally looking at all sorts of different types of machine learning based on data sets, and we're doing that in parallel with looking at it from a pure analytics point of view. So, you know, for me, it's that don't run before you walk, take steps journey. And unfortunately, it goes back to my same point, is that how many companies really have trusted data at volume? Or perhaps the first step of the journey is to create the processes to get trusted data at volume. But yeah, no, they're very salient points. In terms of the volume question, I'm still working on that, and I keep pleading the fifth when people keep asking me that question, because we're still developing that through. But you know, as a rule of thumb, the more data, the better, of course. You know, I personally think, you know, back to that lifetime lies and statistics, there is a risk that the more data points you introduce, the risk of the trusted nature of that data may not be correct. So, you know, one step at a time is my personal view.
Great. Yes, we've had a few comments about what you see as the overall sort of projected timeline horizons for AI in PM. It seems to be that it is kind of a burgeoning start. So we've only got time for a few more questions, but I have some from Jerry here. We often hear the need of cultural, behavioural and attitude change during any kind of organisational transformations. So 2 questions. What realistic AI-related P3M project land cultural change do you foresee? And what can your common or garden PM do to personally affect such a cultural change?
So the last bit was, which changes in process do I see? The P3M bit. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the last bit of the question.
Right. Yeah, we've got a first part of a question on AI related P3M cultural change, and more specifically, what an average, should we say, project manager might do to start looking towards AI in terms of PM work.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the latter point first, if I may, and I think it's really interesting because you know, there's 2 domains here. There's the project manager who is delivering AI projects. Yeah, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the application of AI to the project management discipline. Now, unfortunately, an individual project manager is unlikely to have this as part of the scope of their individual project in terms of what methods and what process they could follow, if you like, because they'll be following the methods and processes of the organization that they sit within, or if they're senior enough, they'll be using their own methods. But to really apply this, I don't think it's going to be the domain in the short term of the individual project manager. I think it will be more likely to be the domain of the portfolio manager, not even the domain of the program manager or the program director. So I think it's portfolio upwards. You know, the director of projects is the people that are most likely to see the benefits and most likely to commission work in this space in the short term. So in the short term, I don't see the individual project manager affecting this. In terms of the process and methods, I think that's a really interesting question for me. One of the questions that I'd really like to get into as part of the journey for Greyfly is looking across all methods and trying to work out what the method of methods are. And I you know, have not started that work, but certainly it's one of the ones on the horizon. And you start thinking about that, you can then start looking at the workflow across multiple methods that could be applied to different clients. And that workflow eventually should be able to be automated from start to finish. So I think that perhaps the prevalent methods at some stage will move away from process delivery to automation themselves. So rather than buying a big book, which is, you know, print or whichever method we're following, actually, I think you'll be buying a more automated system that almost you drive yourself through that project. You know, think of computer-based training on steroids is what I'm suggesting. Yeah, so it's a workflow rather than just a method off-the-shelf method. But you know, again, it's a great question. These are some of the best questions I've had recently, guys. So hats off to that. So.
Great, yes, thank you so much for submitting your questions. We're coming to the end of our time now, so a final question for you, and thank you everyone, including Lloyd, obviously, for being so helpful to answer them. A question from Paul. Do you see a future where all projects contribute to the big data, to say APM as a trusted engine, which can give insights to your projects based on all experience, or kind of, you know, loaded shared database?
Yeah, do you know what? I think it's such a fantastic question. And, you know, it's a toughie because I think actually it comes down to politics. And perhaps that's the biggest challenge in the application of AI in project management is politics. It's people, you know, maturity. There are certain organizations really pushing for data trusts. And the benefits that may give rise to, and shared data trusts. And certainly some corporations are certainly pushing that as well. The cynic in me says it will only go so far. In the capitalist world that we live in, I believe that, you know, the value of the data, of the individual client's data, will be the reserve of that particular client. I think you will see some level of data sharing and some level of data trust, but I think it will be the tip of the iceberg. And I don't know, you know, it's very honourable push, and, you know, obviously as an individual I support it, but the cynic in me says, oh my golly, that's a really tough problem to crack. Can you imagine, even, I don't know, in government, you know, HMRC sharing data with the Department of Pensions? I know it's coming slowly, but oh my God, they've been talking about that since I went to university a few years ago now. So I just think it's a really tough journey, but, you know, hats off to those people, and you know, you know, I'd encourage them to keep trying, but it's going to be difficult. Is that okay?
Okay, great. That's all from me. I'll hand back over to Keith.
Thanks, Alana. I'd like to thank Lloyd and everyone for attending today's webinar on artificial intelligence in project management. If you have any other questions, please contact me or Alana directly. Please also remember our branch Facebook page, which can be found by searching for the phrase Wiltshire BCS, and do keep a lookout for our future webinars. On behalf of the BCS Wiltshire branch and our panelist Lloyd, thank you for joining us today. Finally, as the current situation dictates, wash hands, cover face, and make space. I look forward to seeing you at a live meeting sometime soon. Have a great rest of your evening, and goodbye.
Thank you.